You're with us here on a fresh new edition of the Global Reset right here on CNBC TV18 Prime with me, Prashant Nair. As always, as we're coming out of the weekend, let me summarize the news flow which has hit the tape. Amidst worsening ties with the United States over India's oil imports from Russia, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has dialed Russian President Putin. That was Friday night, according to statements from New Delhi and Moscow. The two leaders discussed Putin's upcoming visit to India for the 23rd annual India-Russia summit, their strategic partnership and the Ukraine conflict. The telephone call that came days after US President Trump imposed a double levy of 50% on India for purchasing Russian crude oil despite the Ukraine conflict followed National Security Advisor Ajit Doval's visit to Moscow to prepare for Mr. Putin's visit to India. In a post shared on X, PM Modi said, and I quote, "Had a very good and detailed conversation with my friend President Putin. I thanked him for sharing the latest developments on Ukraine. We also reviewed the progress in our bilateral agenda and reaffirmed our commitment to further deepen the India-Russia special and privileged strategic partnership. I look forward to hosting President Putin in India later this year." End of quote. Now, of course, all eyes ahead, right, on Friday, because come Friday, President Trump has announced that he'll be meeting with his Russian counterpart, Russian President Putin, to discuss bringing an end to the war in Ukraine. The meeting would be the first US-Russia summit since 2021, when former President Joe Biden met Putin in Geneva. Now, in a statement issued Saturday, the Indian Ministry of External Affairs welcomed the upcoming meeting between Trump and Putin. That is, as I said, on the 15th of August, that is this coming Friday in Alaska. The statement from the MEA here in India reads, "This meeting holds the promise of bringing to an end the ongoing conflict in Ukraine and opening up the prospects for peace." Now, as the world gears up for this meeting between President Putin and President Trump, European leaders emphasized and have been stressing the importance of protecting Ukrainian interests. Remember, Ukrainian President Zelensky has said that they will not sort of cede an inch of Ukrainian territory to Russia, and any agreement which is reached between US and Russia with regards to the conflict in Ukraine without involving Ukraine in those discussions is going to be moot. Here's the report.
Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky on Sunday welcomed a joint statement by European leaders pushing for the protection of Ukrainian interests. It follows a video message on Saturday in which Zelensky said a meeting in Britain of representatives from Ukraine, Europe, the UK and US was constructive. US Vice President J.D. Vance was among them, along with British Foreign Secretary David Lammy, who was hosting Vance and his family during their visit to England. The meeting came after US President Donald Trump announced face-to-face talks with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin in Alaska on August 15th. The British and European leaders, including from France, Italy, Germany, Poland, Finland and the European Commission, on Saturday welcomed Trump's efforts to end the war. But they also stressed the need to pressure Russia and give Kyiv robust and credible security guarantees, adding that, quote, "They remain committed to the principle that international borders must not be changed by force." On Sunday, Zelensky said in a social media post that Ukraine values and fully supports their statement, saying, quote, "The end of the war must be fair, and I'm grateful to everyone who stands with Ukraine and our people today for the sake of peace in Ukraine, which is defending the vital security interests of our European nations."
It's very complicated, but
Trump on Friday talked up the prospect of a deal to resolve the 3.5-year-old conflict.
There'll be some swapping of territories to the betterment of both.
Zelensky and his European allies have warned that any deal requiring Ukraine to surrender significant parts of its territory would only encourage Russian aggression. Meanwhile, Europe has put forward a counter-proposal, a European official said, declining to provide details. The Wall Street Journal said it included demands that any territorial exchange must be reciprocal, with firm security guarantees. The White House did not immediately respond when asked about the counter-proposal.
Well, this is the top global story and very, very consequential for financial markets as well, remember. Now, as all of this unfolds, India continues to push for negotiations on the tariff front with US as well. A parliamentary committee on foreign affairs is set to meet today to discuss tariffs. Top officials of the Commerce and External Affairs ministries are expected to appear before the committee. In fact, on Friday, Indian ambassador to the United States, Vinay Quatra, discussed increasing the energy trade between India and the United States while prioritizing India's energy needs. We understand from sources that India has conveyed its perspective on energy security across. India's crude oil and LNG purchases from US are slated to rise further. But of course, it's been firmly maintained that India is not the only buyer of Russian crude. Let's actually welcome in, two gentlemen into the conversation today. One, of course, from a tariff and trade perspective, the other from, a slightly broader geopolitical angle. What is trade and what are non-trade matters? It's kind of a thin line right now. The lines are blurred. Let's welcome in Jayant Dasgupta, former Indian ambassador to the WTO. Mr. Dasgupta, great to have you with us here on the program. Thank you for joining us. Professor Madhav Nalapat is a geopolitical expert. He's the Director of Geopolitics and International Relations at the Manipal University. Thank you very much, Mr. Nalapat, for joining us as well. It's great to have you. Trade and the Russian oil, both the tariffs and Russian oil both seem to be linked, at least on the face of it, although some say, well, that's not the real reason why we got this additional 25% tariffs. But let's just take things at face value. Mr. Nalapat, if I can ask you, how important is the Friday sort of meeting? And do you think this summit in Alaska will yield a concrete agreement as far as ending the Ukraine conflict is concerned? Certainly there would be a fair bit of work going on behind the scenes, because the last time you had leaders from Ukraine and sort of the US sit together in the White House, it was basically a pretty bizarre meeting. What should we expect this time? This is, of course, for the first time that Putin and President Trump are meeting.
Well, I'd like to point out that the two stands are irreconcilable. The stance of the European partners, including Ukraine, and the stance of President Putin. Now, they're irreconcilable. Now, Putin does not believe that this is Ukrainian territory. And Zelensky is very firm, and the Europeans are firm that this territory has got to be given back. So that is, in my view, an impasse. Now, President Putin has so far handled President Trump very deftly. I think, being a KGB man, he understands the importance of psychology, and he has so far handled him very, very deftly indeed. But it remains to be seen how much, Putin's knowledge of human psychology is going to go in reconciling two irreconciliables. Now, the reality is either the Putin or the Europeans are going to be disappointed. As far as Putin is concerned, he's very clear it should not be him. Now, even the Alaska being chosen is a very significant move. For a simple reason, Alaska was conceded by Russia, by Tsarist Russia, to the United States. I think there was some few $1 million. At that time, it's quite a lot of money. So in that sense, it's a symbol, basically, of the Russian desire for better relations with the United States. Now, that certainly is in everybody's interest, including the Europeans. Quite frankly, they're pursuing this war at the cost of their own economies, at the cost of their own citizens.
Yeah.
And I think, as far as Ukraine being essential to European security, for a long time, Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with European security.
Right. Professor Nalapat, if you were a betting man, yes or no, will we see a comprehensive peace agreement, which then holds?
Look, I'm sorry, but my bet is no. We are not going to see that for quite some time.
You're not going to see that. Okay. Fair enough. And would you want to put odds to it? To that no? Is it a strong no? Is it a
Look,
yeah.
the point about President Trump is that one is never sure of his position at any point in time.
Yeah.
And from that point of view, I'm not going to put any odds. President Trump is quite capable of changing his position. And basically, so far, he's been very understanding of the Russian point of view. He made it very clear, despite a lot of pressure from his European friends, to not that Zelensky would not be welcome at the summit. So, I mean, Trump is capable of surprises, and he is capable of pulling rabbits out of a hat. Frankly, some very unpleasant rabbits, like what he pulled in the case of Indian tariffs. But the reality of the situation is that one would hesitate to put odds, given the mercurial nature of the current U.S. president.
No, that's well put. You know, should we draw a direct line, Professor Nalapat, with regards to what happens on Friday? I mean, so for example, let's assume for the sake of assumption for a bit that, there is some sort of an agreement and there is a ceasefire, right? Should we draw a straight line from that to our situation here in India with regards to these 25% tariffs?
Look, as far as the tariffs are concerned, they're going to hit U.S. consumers the most, quite frankly. And from that point of view, U.S. consumers are already hurting. It's having its own impact on President Trump's approval rating. So far as MAGA supporters are concerned, not all of them, I mean, if I may put it humorously, are millionaires and billionaires. There are a lot of people who are on the margin of.
No, I mean, all that is known, Professor Nalapat. We know that. Should we draw a straight line from that, from the situation in terms of what happens on Friday, to our situation here? Because if Russian sanctions go away as a result of, say, for example, we're assuming that there is perhaps some sort of a deal which is agreed, then, I mean, will that help our cause here? I mean, these additional 25% tariffs.
Look, but what we have to deal with President Trump, I mean, and frankly, that is an independent situation
Okay.
of what's happening in Ukraine. He has compartmentalized the two things. So I think it will depend on I mean, Prime Minister Modi has been close to President Trump in the past, and hopefully he'll be close to him in the future, immediate future. But the reality is they're entirely different situations, and I don't draw any kind of a line at all between the two situations.
Okay. No, I'm only asking that, and let me bring in Mr. Dasgupta as well. I mean, President Trump essentially saying that, well, India, with its purchases of oil from Russia, is financing financing Russia's ability to wage war on Ukraine. I mean, so that war stops, then, I mean, do the tariffs hold? I mean, if that's the rationale which is provided. And of course, many believe that is not the real reason, and I mean, there are other factors at play, but I mean, this is essentially what has been publicly said by President Trump. Mr. Jayant Dasgupta, come in, sir. Your perspective on this entire matter, and how much should we focus on the outcome on this Friday, this summit on Friday?
Well, India has welcomed this summit and has expressed that it should lead eventually to peace coming between the two countries. But having said that, I think there are three things rather, which need to be borne in mind. The first one is that President Zelensky has not been invited to the meetings. The second thing is that President Zelensky has mentioned that he doesn't agree at all to the swap of territories between Russia and Ukraine. He has said very clearly that not a single inch of territory of Ukraine should be ceded away to Russia by the US. The third thing is the Europeans have also, I think, hardened their stance, and they have mentioned that there should not be any compromise on the interests of Ukraine. So all these things would be weighing heavily, and I think they would buttress the stand of Ukraine to whatever comes out of the Trump-Putin meeting. And this was evident right from the beginning that there were two or three major issues which needed to be resolved between the two sides. And the Americans could only act as mediators, and the Europeans also, if possible. And these two, three things were about Crimea, about the areas which the Russian forces have captured in the eastern part of Ukraine. And the third thing was a guarantee that, even if, hypothetically, if the Russians were to withdraw or cede part of the ground that area they have captured, that Ukraine would never become a part of NATO. Now, these are the two or three things which I think are the most important ones, which will have to get resolved before there is any lasting peace between the two countries. As far as India is concerned, if there is some movement, and of course, back channel diplomacy is going on, as you mentioned. Ambassador Vinay Quatra of India has already spoken to Senator Lindsey Graham, who had moved a bill initially for imposing tariffs of about 500%, up to 500% on countries which bought Russian oil. And President Trump had also, in its wake, mentioned that he would impose 100% tariffs. Of course, he's gone ahead and imposed 25% tariffs, and that too only on India. Now, if both things happen, one is that there is a very positive outcome between President Trump and Putin on the 15th of August, which I don't think is very likely. It would only be a kind of a preliminary meeting because the important aspects would need President Zelensky's presence also at the table. So that is, if that happens, then possibly President Trump could get some kind of an exit avenue. And if the pressure, because there are several Republican voices also which have spoken up against the Trump tariffs on India, so he could get an escape avenue, and he could defer the tariff of 25%, which he has promised to impose on India from the 28th of August. So that is where matters stand today, I think.
Okay. Fair enough. Point taken. Financial markets, I can tell you both, are in a, I mean, of course, their job is anticipating. They are very, very hopeful that something gets done. And on Friday, I mean, the last time, of course, President Zelensky was in the White House. He had J.D. Vance bearing down on him. And of course, I mean, Trump himself saying, well, you don't have any cards. So we'll see if Zelensky is part of the conversations on Friday, if he's invited finally at the end of it, or it's going to be like a two-way conversation. And we will hear what comes out of it. I have to take a quick commercial break here, gentlemen. So allow me to do that. I'm going to come back and continue this conversation. Welcome back. You're with us here on the Global Reset, and we're in conversation with our guests today on, of course, I mean, the big summit, which is hopefully big and, as I said earlier, hopeful. But although our guests are not of the opinion that perhaps we see a deal, at least not straight away. Professor Nalapat, if I can come to you, sir. You know, from an Indian perspective, right? I mean, as I said earlier, and I think both of you acknowledged as well, we welcomed this summit in Alaska between both presidents. Additionally, what do you think can India do in a sort of larger way? I mean, we've of course agreed to increase our energy imports from US. It's already, by the way, gone up substantially over the last 2 years or so. What can we do? I mean, we anyway buy about 200, and this is something which others have pointed out as well. We buy about $200 billion of oil, import $200 billion plus worth of oil every year. We've got to buy it every year from somewhere. So why not sort of, if the issue is the trade deficit, which is about $40 billion on the US side and surplus on our side, why not buy $40 billion worth of oil from the US and be done with it? Is that possible? I mean, is that in the realm of possibility? What is your sense, sir?
Look, the point is that it can be done, yes, in terms of practicality. But again, the problem is Trump. Trump is so mercurial that if you do that, he'll come forward with some new program. For example, leave BRICS, leave SCO. Prime Minister Modi is going for the SCO meeting, the SCO summit. He's going to meet President Xi and President Putin. he has invited President Putin to India, and Putin is a welcome visitor to India, and then he will demand that as well. So the problem is that will be a very slippery slope. And I think India is doing correctly in being very polite, but in taking a very clear stance that is not going to budge under pressure. Because should it do so, then tomorrow the demands are going to be many. And as far as Lindsey Graham is concerned, I'm not very hopeful of any change in his mindset because Graham has been one of the Ukraine hawks. He's been completely on the European side where Ukraine is concerned, unlike a lot of his fellow Republican senators. So I would only like to say that, in my view, what India is doing is correct, and that is signaling that it is not going to resile from its stand. And the reality of the situation is that, look, people in the United States, including almost everybody in the Trump team, realize the real threat is not from Russia, it's from China. It's not anywhere where it was in the previous century. It's in the Indo-Pacific. And from that point of view, they're extremely unhappy with President Trump for these tariffs that he has levied on India.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how long this kind of a situation is going to continue before there is a kickback in the sense of, from within the Republican Party itself. They are losing popularity. Their voters are getting upset. The voters are saying that what have you done? And they're having, a buyer's regret in having voted Trump. So given that situation, I don't think it lasts more than a few months, if at most. And I think India is doing the right thing by standing firm because it's a very, very, very slippery slope, as I said.
If you sort of give in, shifting goalposts, right?
Many more options, many more concessions will be demanded on a whole host of issues. And I don't think that's advisable at all.
Yeah, the shifting goalposts. If this is one, then there's something else, and then there's something else. I mean, it's like we've already seen many issues. And it's interesting you brought up China because, I mean, before till a year ago, I mean, I think if there was one thing both parties in the US agreed on, perhaps the only thing was China. Now it's been a pretty strange turn of things. If I can ask you both, for your sense on what do you think really has gone wrong in this between at least in President Trump's mind? I mean, what do you think has soured things to this degree? Very briefly, Professor Nalapat, if we can start with you, sir.
Look, I've tracked President Trump and his. I have the privilege of knowing some members of his team, and very frankly, he's not driven by whatever issue he raises. It's basically the excuse. The fact is, it's his ego, and and so far as Putin has taken care of his ego, he has talked about very, very euphemistic terms about some of the gyrations of President Trump. And I think Prime Minister Modi has also been very, very diplomatic on that matter. So the problem is his ego. And the problem is that, I mean, in my view, that ego demands that you say yes to everything, and then you may do what you like, but you say yes to everything in public. Now, obviously, we can't do that. We can't do that where, for example, Operation Sindoor was concerned. We can't do that where, avoiding Russian crude. And may I point out that if you look at energy as a totality, and if you look at, for example, uranium, it's a very important energy source. Well, the Europeans and the Americans are big buyers of Russian uranium. So very frankly, it's not these issues. It's something to do with personal ego, and it's the personal ego of President Trump, and that is overriding the policy consideration.
So tomorrow, Professor Nalapat, just as a thought experiment, if we put out a statement nominating President Trump for the Nobel, you think this goes away?
Well,
I mean, without saying anything else, without touching upon the India-Pak issue or anything. I mean, say, well, great job, and this is, I think the President Trump should get the Nobel. You think it eases up the situation to a great degree?
Well, in my view, no, because after having done all this, first of all, nominating for a Nobel Peace Prize will be seen as a kind of...
No, I'm not. Of course we will not. I'm saying as a thought experiment. I mean, Because you're saying it is ego more than anything else, which is driving all of this, and maybe he feels slighted or whatever. So you think, what's the solution is essentially what I'm trying to get to.
Look, in my personal view, the solution is that the Republican Party understands the damage that President Trump, in his current avatar, is doing to the Republican Party and to the Republican base, and not only the midterms which are coming, in which Democrats may seize control of both the Senate and the
Sure,
U.S. House
sure.
of Representatives.
Sure.
So I think and I think that is where a lot of Indian effort needs to be directed. As far as President Trump is concerned, he's so unpredictable, frankly, that finding out, saying that this may help is not, in my view, realistic. And nominating for the Nobel, in my personal view, it should be avoided for a simple reason. It will mean nominating somebody who has been, frankly, very, very negative as far as Indian interests are concerned, as far as US interests are concerned.
But there is an element of real politics here, right? I mean, you deal with what is on the other side. I mean, I don't know. Mr. Dasgupta, you want to come in, sir?
I just want to say, I want to add one point.
Yes.
The United States is not President Trump.
Yes.
But
for 3.5 years he is. For another 3.5 years he is, right? Now I'm not suggesting this or that. I'm just saying, you got all these companies announcing hundreds of billions of dollars of investment. Who knows it'll happen or not, right? I mean, for now, these are all announcements which are happening. I mean, take the case of semiconductors, 100% tariffs on semiconductors. All these companies have announced hundreds of billion dollars worth of investment in the US. And they are exempt for now because of the announcements, basically. So, but let me just wrap this up with...
I think announcements are fine.
Yeah.
And announcements will be absolutely fine. There's no question about it. This is a temporary ego issue.
Yeah.
And probably temporary methods will resolve it.
Mr. Dasgupta, quick last thought, sir. Your thoughts, same question. Problem and solution.
At the moment,
Yeah.
because President Trump, is totally unpredictable, and he keeps shifting the goalposts. If, hypothetically, the question that you raised about buying $40 billion worth of oil from the US, why should we buy that oil? If the US is prepared to sell it to us at rates equal to the Russians or lower than the Russians, we have no problems. We have been increasing our purchases from the US. But there has to be equity. The other thing is, we can't take decisions on foreign policy with a gun pointed at our head. That
Absolutely.
Today it is 25% tariffs, tomorrow it could be more. The third point I wanted to mention is that suppose you start buying US oil. But President Trump will say, no, I also mentioned something about stopping your purchases of Russian arms and ammunition. So the inherent message is you go in for the F-35s and the Stryker, vehicles and a host of other things. Now that is something which will make us give up our strategic autonomy completely and be stooges of the US, if I may say so. That just can't be allowed. The third thing is that the Trump tariffs, which have been imposed, are unlikely to last for very long because there is already a backlash in the US itself from the Republicans, from the people, and
and maybe from the courts, and maybe from the courts as well.
Yes, the courts also, because the Federal Court of Appeal, that is, if it, for instance, goes against the Trump decision, the Trump administration will appeal. So it will probably get sorted out only in the Supreme Court. So that will take another 6 to 8 months. So it is my conjecture that by about early spring, March or thereabouts, inflation would have risen, the US consumer would have suffered, there would be a backlash, and that would get conveyed in no uncertain terms to the Republicans. And they would put pressure on President Trump to roll back all the tariffs in as quiet a manner and as unostentatious manner as possible. And so that is there. If it doesn't happen, then I think we should be prepared for the long haul. It will cause a lot of hardship and misery to our export-oriented industries. That is for sure.
Sure.
But I think we have to lump it.
Yeah.
As an independent
time.
nation with a lot of self-respect and dignity, we can't take things lying down like this.
Absolutely, I completely agree. I know Professor Nalapat also wants to come in, but I'm completely out of time, gentlemen. I'll invite both of you back on this program because this is something which we will continue to discuss and debate with newer developments added in along the way. Thanks both of you for joining in on this program today. Really appreciate your time, gentlemen. Thanks very much. That's it on this edition of the Global Reset. Thank you for staying with me. More coming up on the other side.